my father was migrated from Iraq, and throughout his entire life, he never felt that he was British. To him, being British was merely to have a passport which would allow him to travel and to work for the best interests of Iraq. And once the chance came for him to return to Iraq and hopefully do something that would, allow him to think that he was doing something by his country, he took that opportunity. I was less inclined to do that, and therefore I haven't returned to Iraq, despite the fact that I was invited to return.
Have you thought about returning to Yorkshire though?
It's tough. The thing is, I always tell everyone that when I was in Leeds, I was living and teaching in Leeds for a while. I used to travel to London twice a week. Now I moved to London. I couldn't travel to Leeds once every 4 months. It's just incredible. I don't know what it is about London.
Maybe age.
Maybe age, maybe gravity, maybe magnetism. I don't know what it is.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome to today's Islam 21C Unscripted Podcast. I'm your host, Salman Butt, and with us today we're very lucky to have a dear special guest, I could say friend, I could say ustad, a person who's, mashallah, been on the British Muslim scene for many a year. I won't hazard a guess as to how many. It's Dr. Altikriti.
It's a pleasure. Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Thanks for coming.
My pleasure.
Did you come from far?
West London, so yes, another country.
Another West London at heart. Alhamdulillah. I really hate coming to...
It's East London is lovely people, but the trip is arduous.
But if I do come to East London, I come to Quaker Street Coffee and Bubble Tea. How's that for a nice little advert in the middle? They're the gracious hosts of the venue who've provided us this very nice space to have this podcast today. So thank you to them. I think if you mention Islam 21C, if you come here, you'll get charged 10% extra. So either that or 10% off, one of those two, but it's worth a shot. Dr. Anas, we all kind of enjoyed the spectacle of the UK general election,
didn't we?
Over the last few weeks, and we had during the election time, as is kind of expected, there's a lot of talk about getting out and voting and Muslims getting involved and that kind of stuff. And after the election, we spoke about what next. Then obviously election time. Elections are important, but voting isn't the be all and end all. Yeah. Some people are very worried that if we talk about elections so much, that might give us a false sense of kind of having done something. So we kind of just fold our hands and wait till the next general election. And we had a nice conversation last week with Azad Ali and Imam Shakil, talking about some of the things that Muslims should be doing between election times, between election cycles, and that's where the real activism, real work happens. And one thing that was kind of came up again and again, and in a lot of forums and groups that I'm on, is that Muslims should have organizations for lobbying, think tanks for carrying out research and stuff. And that's why you're being here as I think founder of the Cordoba Foundation is something that kind of ties in nicely to that. Can you describe to us what Cordoba Foundation does, and as much as you're able to disclose?
Well, in a couple of weeks' time, the Cordoba Foundation will celebrate its 15th anniversary. We were set up in the first week of January 2005, and when we set up, the ultimate aim was basically to bridge the narrative in terms of how the West speaks of and sees the Muslim world, and how the Muslim world also sees the West. The misunderstanding, let's say the sort of skewed image of the other on both sides is prevalent, and at the time was quite heightened because of we had just emerged from the Iraq War. We were still in the midst of the phase called the War on Terror, and there are all sorts of alarm bells ringing on many levels. So it was important to create something that would try to create a narrative that would allow the West to understand the Muslim world better, as well as vice versa, the Muslims understanding the West better. Because essentially at the time we constantly said that the Muslim world was all of a sudden seeing the West through the eyes of George W. Bush and Tony Blair, and the West was seeing the Muslim world through the eyes of Osama bin Laden, and both are wrong. But then things developed, obviously, with time and events and demands and progressions as well, developments within the Muslim communities in Europe and North America, the events that took place in the Middle East, obviously the Arab Spring and the such. And the Cordoba Foundation quickly developed into what I would term as a think tank, meaning that it would do research, but not for research purposes alone. It would carry out training, but not for training alone. It would hold events, but not for the sake of the events on their own. All of these would lead to making an impact. So bit by bit, the Cordoba Foundation became effectively a lobbying organization. So we'd have a bit of research on something pertinent and important, and we would carry that to the concerned agencies, to the concerned ministries, departments, personnel, so that basically the findings of that particular research would be taken on board and would be implemented as well. And over the years, alhamdulillah, we've proven to be successful and effective. And I say so, obviously, I'm the founder of the Cordoba Foundation, so I would, blow my own trumpet. But I would take stock from the fact that we have been labeled as extremists and terrorists by people who aren't very nice. And that to me tells me that usually when oppressive governments, for instance, when they label us as being extremists or terrorists, that's a good thing. That's a good badge of honor to carry. I would worry when good people describe us in critical terms, but when bad people describe us in critical terms, that's where we would like to be.
Signpost that you're on the right track.
Exactly. So it's happened time and time again. David Cameron, when in opposition, he attacked us openly in Parliament and described us in terms which we've challenged him to say outside of Parliament and which he neglected to respond to.
Because in Parliament, you have parliamentary privilege.
You have parliamentary privilege.
Able to basically...
Which is a nice thing.
utter lies without any retribution.
It's a nice thing when you're in that particular position. You can say whatever you want, lies or truth, and then get away with it. And we've been attacked by right-wing, by Zionist corners, whether media or politics or the such.
I remember one of your reports was on the Henry Jackson Society.
Correct.
And neoconservatism.
We actually, before the Henry Jackson Society, there was the Center for Social Cohesion, if you recall. And we actually published a report into Policy Exchange and the Center for Social Cohesion and their agenda. And more importantly, we dedicated half of that report to the money trail, to where they were getting their funds from, that was driving them to adopt such right-wing, extremist, xenophobic, sometimes even blatantly racist and Islamophobic positions. And a few months after that, the Center for Social Cohesion declared that it was closing down. And we had the Henry Jackson Society, and Douglas Murray, who headed the Center for Social Cohesion, moved from that to the new setup, the Henry Jackson Society. So it's good that we've constantly been in the crossfires of right-wing Zionist, neocon think tanks and individuals. That's a good place to be. I'm fairly proud of that. So alhamdulillah, I agree absolutely with what you opened up with. And the thesis and arguments of Imam Shakil, as well as Azad Ali and many others, about the elections pre as well as post. It's not just elections when we wake up and realize that we need to do a few things and maybe just tick that box and send off the ballot paper or go to the polling station. It's actually 365 days every single year. And therefore, when the elections come, that's the very final, furlong, if you wish. That's the final phase of being political. Essentially, being political to me, and I have constantly believed in this since I started being a student activist when I was 18, doing my A-levels in Manchester. And getting into scraps unfortunately, with Muslims. Because at the time, telling people to go and vote or stand up for elections in council elections or the such was extremely unpopular. It was something that was unheard of. So I was, hurled out of many a mosque and many a musalla, and I was prevented from delivering Jum'ah khutbah in many mosques due to my positions, which some thought at the time were anti-Islam. But to me, my understanding of Islam is that it is essentially political. Everything that we do is political. And I don't mean political in the parliament sense or Westminster sense. I mean political in the concept of islah. إن أريد إلا الإصلاح ما استطعت وما توفيقي إلا بالله. All that I want is reform and development to all. ما استطعت.
That's very important.
To the extent of my ability.
Because some people have this view that you have to make change kind of all of a sudden on a global scale or on a systemic massive scale.
And not only that, but the argument against, for instance, my position and my call to basically be political is that, well, what did it do? What did it do? But that's not.
What do?
Your political engagement. Yeah. Why didn't that work? Why didn't protesting against the war in Iraq when 2.5 million people marched in London? Why didn't that work? So it's futile. So the anti-politics brigade, whoever they may be, and as sincere their hearts may be, and I'm pretty sure that they are. But their argument moves from, first of all, is it halal or haram? And then when they lose that argument, they move to, well, it doesn't really work. It's futile. You're just wasting your time. But the point is, mastata'at. You can argue that the vast majority of Anbiya and Rusul, the messengers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, actually failed. When Nuh alayhi salam kept calling for almost 10 centuries.
If you're judging by the material outcome.
It's not going to work. And we need to stop doing that. So this islah, whether it be writing a letter to my counselor in order to complain against something, potholes on the road, for instance, or that the bin collection isn't sufficient, or that someone is being rowdy and bothering their neighbors, or complaining to the education ministry regarding the syllabus that my children or other people's children are being subjected to. Or the banking sector as to the practices of the banks. All of these which might appear to be, well, common sense citizenship issues which anyone can do, that is being political. That is being political. Any attempt to reform, any attempt, if you wish to use the sort of the term that we are comfortable with and appreciate more, any aspect of da'wah is essentially being political. You're creating change. You're having an impact. So it's a must. And this election saw, to my knowledge, and from what I saw, an unprecedented level of engagement and activism and excitement and discussion throughout the Muslim community, throughout the country. I attended probably more than 30 events, hustings, seminars, meetings and the such up and down the country.
Assalamualaikum guys, sorry to butt in, but if you're enjoying this podcast, please head over to islam20c.com/donate to help us make more. And if you're not enjoying it, head over anyway and help us make better ones. I've heard that as well, that anecdotally a lot of people have been saying that they've seen identifiably Muslim people, beards and hijabs and that kind of stuff at polling stations, at hustings, organising events. Is that something you'd say this kind of, you can say with confidence?
No, absolutely. I would think of myself as a Yorkshire lad rather than a Londoner. I lived in Yorkshire for nigh on 20 years, and I used to roam Yorkshire, Lancashire, that mid-belt, east to west. And up until 2010, many mosques in Lancashire, many mosques in Yorkshire would, politely say, no, thank you. That is something we do not need. I've been prevented from giving out leaflets in mosques. Those same mosques invited me back to say something about how they should get engaged in the current elections. And by the way, it's not a change of personnel. The very same imam, the very same director of that mosque calls me and says, could you come up because we have a meeting of youngsters.
Why do you think that is? Is it generally a broad kind of change in perspective by the leadership, or is it something that they've found, okay, this is, the people are asking for this, it's getting too loud to ignore now?
I'm going to give you my own perspective. This is what I see from what I've dealt with. Partly it's someone who's come to a realization, and that's great. But mostly, I would say, it's the emergence of a new generation that is demanding of their parents, of their uncles, of their aunts, to change their positions. Yeah. They're basically saying, listen, what you're saying is, I'm going to respect it, but it's wrong. We need to be involved. And to be honest, I have seldom seen a young student generation. I'm talking about post-15, even those who don't still vote. College, sixth form, up until university, seldom have I seen not only the level and the expanse of engagement, but the kind of arguments that are being proposed. And I'm talking, I'm really, really pleased that the Muslims have positioned themselves across the board. You can't identify the Muslims as being pro-Labour or pro-Tories or pro-Lib Dems. They are across the board, and that's a very, very good thing. And that, I believe, every single Muslim organization has called for, that people take into consideration who their candidate is, have a list of criteria of the most important issues to them, and tick the boxes and then see who is best. And then at the end, if there is a collaborative tactical vote to take place, then take part in that, then consider that. And that's a very, very good thing. The kind of arguments I've been privy to, and I took part in three such settings in which student unions across the country, one in London, one in Manchester, one in Birmingham, took place where Muslim Tories and Muslim Lib Dems and Muslim Labour members came together around the table, and they were discussing policies of their parties. They were discussing manifestos, and the level of and the depth and maturity of the discussion was something that was really, really inspiring.
I really do want to believe that is indicative of a broader trend, but there's a part of me that's kind of skeptic. Maybe you're having some kind of observation bias, like a doctor is exposed to a lot of ill people. Likewise, because of your career and your interest, you're exposed to those people who are more interested in politics. Do you know if that's a broad change? Is a trajectory, in your opinion, of the Muslim community in the UK going in that direction, or could you? Because I like to kind of enter and disrupt echo chambers.
Yes, of course.
That's my,
of course.
And I'm on a few groups, and people who are still kind of exhibiting what I would call an anti-politics. Yeah. Of kind of abstention, of separate yourselves, or this is a kufr system, or that kind of stuff.
I'm basing, as I said, this is my personal perspective. This is what I'm seeing, and I have been quite active in every single election over the past, let's say, 18, 20 years. But at least, even more, but I don't want to give away my age.
But you started when you were 10, about 10?
Yeah, something like that. But I think that if you were to gauge the elections from the time when the Labour arrived in 1997, up until now, you will see a constant rise in the level of engagement throughout the Muslim community. I also take a strong indication from my own experience and from the experience of those close to me. When, for instance, in 1987, when we were outside our musallas in Manchester University or UMIST or whatever, and leafleting for people to go and register to vote and the such.
Outside Blockbuster Video and Woolworths.
BHS and Littlewoods, and we were literally hounded. We were literally set upon. I recall quite vividly, three burly brothers, emerging from the mosque and saying, "Why are you standing here? And you should." Be on your way and don't do this and throw this away. And they would take away the leaflets that we had done in a very, very primitive way, handwritten and then copied in the old Xerox machines, and they would just throw it away in front of us. Those same mosques now, those same musallas are now hubs of activism, of engagement, So from my experience of the very same places that used to be anti engagement, and the people who used to be anti-engagement, and the circle of communities, let's say, that used to be anti-engagement, are now engaged. I wouldn't say, all of them. I wouldn't say all to the same level that I would hope that they would be. But things are changing. And I think a lot of that is driven firstly because people have contemplated, people have gained a new perspective, as well as, listen, we live in a time when being a Muslim has almost, and I wouldn't dare judge the era of my father or my uncles in the 70s and 60s and the such, and how difficult those times were. But in our living memory, it's now amongst the hardest of times to be a Muslim. And the kind of spike in Islamophobic attacks, verbal and physical, across the board, is documented as having increased over the past 2 years by sometimes astronomical percentages. We're talking about 620% in some areas. We're talking about 300, 400% in areas in boroughs in London, for instance. We're talking in Lancashire, for instance, an increase of 180%. People are feeling that.
So if somebody's a racist Islamophobe, in other words, if you want Muslims to stop engaging and trying to make their mark on the place, then stop attacking them.
Well, yeah, that
might go back into their shells.
It's a very, very valid point, and maybe someone ought to do a campaign around that specific.
I have a theory as well of maybe some of the logic behind, some of the reasoning behind the change, and that is, I think if you feel that you belong here, that Islam belongs here, that this is your home, then you're more likely to make your mark, spread some roots, call for your rights and so forth. If you feel internally or subconsciously that you're a guest in someone else's land, as our parents, perhaps rightfully so they felt, because they were born somewhere else and they felt themselves as a muhajir of sorts, economic, probably.
Migrants.
But it's not, if you feel that you're a guest, and it's not part of being a gracious guest to demand your rights, make your mark. A lot of I was speaking to the brothers in Birmingham, about this protests around the schools and stuff, and they said that it's actually the young mums who are making more trouble for the schools, and the elder ones, they're like, they literally said, this is a Christian country, don't tell them how to run it, or we have to listen to them. But the younger ones who've born and raised here, they feel more at home here, and therefore they feel more likely to, or more confident in making demands.
This is textbook immigrant communities. This is these are the phases that people go through. The first wave of immigrants, the first 1 or 2 generations, they will feel that feeling of appreciation. I'm a guest, so I appreciate being allowed here. And my academic background is that I'm a translator and interpreter. And
I read that you're a hostage negotiator.
I'm also a hostage negotiator. I'm many things. I have so many caps. I keep them in a box, and and I can't count the number of letters, articles, messages, statements that start with or end with, we'd like to thank the authorities for allowing us to be here, to enter, to hold our conference in a peaceful, hundreds of times. And every time my heart sinks.
I had that in a khutbah once.
It's
very annoying.
By the way, in Arabic, there is a slang sort of saying, "Ya gharib kun adib," "O stranger, be polite or be courteous." So you should feel as though you're a guest and behave like a guest ought to behave. You should ask for permission when you need to go to the toilet, for instance. You should ask for permission when you want a cup of tea, or you should eat your food although it tastes horrible.
Just smile politely.
Just smile and just keep your head down and don't create too much of a fuss. But then the second generation comes. And the second generation is usually labeled as the rebellious generation. It's the generation that finds... totally against.
Yeah.
So they rebel against their culture, their traditions, the ways of their fathers, their even faith, probably their culture and everything. And then you have the next generation, which becomes more constructive, which sees the validity in the position of the first generation and also the argument of the second generation. And they try to find a way. Those are the productive, if you like. That phase is a productive phase. And it depends on the nature of the community, how fast they cross these phases. Otherwise, it's textbook. The way that you described.
It's like a sunnah of Allah in the creation. Even in biology, homeostasis. Whenever a change is applied to something, a system will naturally kind of react to overcompensate for that change.
Absolutely.
Until you have this kind of wave, and then
you plateau.
Peters out.
Yeah. So it's something that I think is partly natural. It's generational. Yeah. It's about time. But also, I believe that there is now an emerging generation who absolutely feel that they are British. This whole integration argument. And I'm someone who's spoken publicly about this being a very loaded, weaponized term that we mustn't take on board, that we should,
What do you have against A-level maths?
You're dying to press that particular button, weren't you, Salman?
Okay, I've got it on my system now.
So, the whole thing about we must integrate and the such, it's a red herring. It's a false warning, and we shouldn't really waste too much time on that. Well, firstly, because you can't measure it. I mean, how do I assess whether you're integrated or not? In Britain, for instance, certain agencies have developed a list of questions, amongst which you have to answer, silly questions about who was when Prime Minister and the such, which most Britons won't recognize.
What to do if you knock over someone's drink?
Probably.
I think that's one of those citizenship questions.
Yeah, and in Germany, for instance, what your political views are when it comes to Israel, for instance, or certain issues when it comes to homosexuality or the such, and you're based upon this, and it neglects one of the foundations of Western societies, and that is free speech, free expression, open thinking, broad-mindedness, and people adopting whatever position they wish on certain matters.
That's what I felt about the whole British values discourse, which is thankfully kind of taken a back seat now.
And also, who gets to say, who gets to decide whether I pass that particular test? Where do I get this certificate of being absolutely integrated from? Who gives it to me?
Ironically, it's the people who feel quite British that I know, people whose families have been in this country for generations, they're more likely to say get lost.
Exactly, because they are truly British. Yeah. Because they are truly British. You say, well, I'm going to think what I want to think. Yeah. I'm going to believe in what I want to believe.
Maybe it's a test to see if you take this seriously, then you're not integrated. If you say get lost, then...
I mean, for instance, my father was migrated from Iraq, and throughout his entire life, he never felt that he was British. To him, being British was merely to have a passport which would allow him to travel and to work for the best interests of Iraq. And once the chance came for him to return to Iraq and hopefully do something that would allow him to think that he was doing something by his country, he took that opportunity. I was less inclined to do that, and therefore I haven't returned to Iraq, despite the fact that I was invited to return.
Have you thought about returning to Yorkshire, though?
It's tough. Yeah. The thing is, I always tell everyone that when I was in Leeds, I was living and teaching in Leeds for a while. I used to travel to London twice a week. Now I moved to London. I couldn't travel to Leeds once every 4 months. It's just incredible. I don't know what it is about London.
Maybe age.
Maybe age, maybe gravity, maybe magnetism. I don't know what it is. But anyway.
I mean, it's interesting you mentioned the feel grateful narrative, because that's something that a lot of people outside the Muslim community tend to be more right-wing, racist, Islamophobic types. they have still absorbed. And and not just with Muslims, if you see the current controversy Stormzy's created, quite rightly so, calling out racism in Britain and stuff. A lot of people have been saying, look how successful you are. You should be grateful that you've been given these opportunities. And that kind of rhetoric is still out there.
It's listen, and this comes back in waves and cycles. The same that's being said today was said 30 years ago, and was said 50 years before then, and then and the target
different
changes.
Communities.
I mean, it was the Jews, then it was the blacks, then it was the Irish. I lived through the time when it was the Irish. I went to a school where
so you're all right.
I'm all right, fine.
You're all right. They were like,
absolutely, and so. But the narrative is the same.
Yeah.
I was once speaking on the same panel as a rabbi, Rabbi Ruby Wax, and she presented a copy of the Daily Mail in 1920 something, and the front page could be just one word, Jews taken out and Muslims inserted, and it would be the same. You'd expect it to be yesterday's issues of the Daily Mail. So the narrative is the same. The targets change. And today, unfortunately, the Muslim community are the same. But by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we have the experience, we have the technology, and we have the friends out there who make us feel assured that we're not alone. And that's the great difference. I recall quite clearly when a black parent of a schoolmate of mine was literally hounded down the road by white parents when I was going to school. I was about 8, and no one batted an eyelid. No one moved. And I recall those scenes till now. It was like a nightmare playing in my mind. But now things are different. Now you see that people stand up for each other in tube trains, in buses,
especially if you're wearing a big backpack.
Especially if you're wearing a big backpack, yes. And it's something that we should see as a challenge. I'll come back to the election thing because. And I'm going to say something which might sound a little bit controversial and a little bit awkward and funny.
Okay. Well, like that.
Keep your finger on that button. But I'll tell you what, it might have been the best thing for the Muslim community that the results emerged as they were, and which most Muslims felt quite down about.
Okay.
The fact that not only did the Tories win, which was expected anyway, but
that's what everyone's saying now, isn't it? Hindsight's 2020.
Well, the thing is, I constantly said, and on the day of the elections, I did an interview with Al Jazeera, and I said that the possibility is, or the probability is, that the Tories will win, but without a majority. The scale of the majority was what took everyone by surprise. So, but it could be that
How can this be? In your view, a good
thing? It might be the catalyst that would drive people to work constantly, and not to think that we've done well, we achieved what we went out to achieve, we got the result that we wanted,
go back to normal,
and therefore we go back to normal and then wake up in 4 or 5 years' time. I believe that the Muslim community is aware of the challenges. I believe that the Muslim community in all its facets, and by the way, the Muslim community, and the more you travel, by the way, between the towns and cities and go to various musallas and masajid and jawami' and meet with people, you realize how diverse we are, how varied we are, how this great mosaic of a community. People of all madhahib, of all traditions, of all cultures. I got to meet with the Balkan Muslim community here in North London. I got to meet with the Caribbean Muslim community in South London. I got to meet with, the Pakistani, if you wish, community in Lancashire. I got to meet with the Arab community in Leeds. And you get to understand that they all have their respective concerns, worries, challenges, and their ambitions and aspirations. And hopefully this result will help in them feel that they need that they can't sit back and do nothing like probably many people have done in the past 4, 5, even 10 years.
Assalamu alaikum guys, me again, reminding you to head over to islam21c.com/donate to keep the lights on Islam 21c. We pride ourselves on being independent and being funded by the grassroots community. It's interesting, the parallels with Jewish community, black community and so forth. But I think one of the things with the Muslim community, I'm not sure if that was similar or echoed with other communities, is that the Muslim community has a broader narrative beyond our borders here. We have this notion of an ummah. We see, and there's a lot of, especially young brothers and sisters, they see what's happening in Idlib right now. They see what's happening in East Turkestan. They see what's happening with, the Indian Muslims right now in Kashmir. The list is long, and that kind of, bad news almost all the time on our news feeds now or in our television screens or whatever. That has an impact on us, and there's a desire to want to do something. Right, but I mean, how would you, from your perspective and your history and trajectory in activism, what's your narrative? What's your message about Muslims here vis-a-vis problems that are happening elsewhere? How can we discharge some of our responsibility for our brothers and sisters in Idlib, for example, or India or Kashmir or East Turkestan?
The list is long. You've only mentioned 4 or 5, and I could add Yemen, I could add Libya, I can add the list is truly very, very long. Subhanallah, it's just a test that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is sending not only our way, but this is a test for all of humanity. The first thing to think about is, I would say, to reject the narrative that says, well, you concentrate on foreign issues too much. I've heard that. And in fact, I was discussing this with a number of brothers last week who said, well, one of our problems is that we talk too much about Palestine, we talk too much about Kashmir, we talk too much about the Uyghur or the Rohingya or this or that, and that has turned off not only the public, but it's also turned off candidates. I mean, candidates whom we talk about Syria, about Yemen, about the such, they just switched off. And I find this quite surprising, especially for people who believe, not just claim, but believe that they are British. To be a global citizen today is something which is absolutely fantastic. I mean, it's probably now a minority breed. I mean, I don't think that most people describe themselves as global citizens. But what's waking people up is the issue of global change. All of a sudden, everyone worth their salt, everyone who wants to be on a TV screen, who wants to be heard, who wants people's votes, will absolutely mention somewhere in what they're saying about the environment and about global climate change and about climate. This is now the issue that tops everyone's list. And all of a sudden, it's not so bad to talk about something which is outside our borders, okay? In the same way, we can talk about famine or disease or war or oppression and tie it within this whole global perspective about what role I play. And it must be induced, and this is part of the fight against nationalism and the nasty kind of nationalism, that these are the borders and I'm going to protect them with my blood and I'm going to talk about that. This xenophobic kind of narrative. The best antidote to this is to speak about our role and our responsibility towards the globe. I said at the time when I and many other brothers and sisters were leading the 2.5 million march in 2003 against the war in Iraq. I used to say that I'm not doing this because my father, is an Iraqi, or that they happen to be Arabs and Muslims as I happen to be. I am truly fearful for my British neighbors because I believe that what you sow, you will reap.
Absolutely.
And if you sow death and destruction upon other people who have done no harm to me, then one day death and destruction will come to me. And that's something I do not want for my own people and my own country. What happened. And that's precisely what's happened, unfortunately. that kind of narrative that if I want prosperity and peace, if I want clean air, if I want good health services, if I want good education, then I must ensure that not only my own borders, but everyone enjoys the same. If I want freedom, it doesn't work if I watch and do nothing as someone's freedom is trampled upon. If I want democracy, then it doesn't work if I watch as a democracy is being crushed by military tanks and I do absolutely nothing, probably even deal with the driver of that particular tank.
Or sell them the tank.
Or sell them the tank in the first place. So having that kind of narrative and establishing that new constituency, which is being global citizens, and talking about our responsibilities as individuals, as organizations, towards everything that happens in the world. And by the way, this is a big responsibility. It might sound like fun for some right now, but it brings us another form of responsibility, and that is, if I am going to stand up for the people of Rohingya and Uyghur and Kashmir and the like, I must also stand up for a non-Muslim community or state or nation that are being oppressed, by anyone either internally or externally. So basically, I need to be absolutely non-hypocritical.
كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس.
للناس, جميع الناس, all people. So it's both an advantage, but also a responsibility that we must absolutely demonstrate that we're up to. But it's not a difficult one, and I'm often surprised by imams or by my own brothers and sisters who say, this is too complex, let's keep it simple, let's just focus on British issues. Fine, let's talk about British, but then how are you going to talk about the banking sector and what it does to third world countries and communities abroad, and the creation of famine and the creation of sweatshops and the such? If you're not going to address, it's not just about, wallahi, is interest rates, are they high or low, and should they be, and inflation and the such, as though this is all I care about. No, I'm sorry. I'm part of a structure. I'm part of a world order. Without the reform, I will suffer at some stage. So in order to, if you wish, self-preserve and protect my own, I should embark on these issues.
I mean, one thing is obviously using a platform and speaking out and raising awareness, and that's very interesting and very important, rather. But is there something beyond that? I mean, do you feel that there's some kind of mechanism or framework for global change in terms of moving away from this, what you described as a world order? We've seen recently different Muslim kind of statesmen making powerful statements about, trying to, it seems ostensibly, for example, with the KL Summit, Kuala Lumpur Summit, that there seems to be a rival kind of voice of Muslims emerging on a global stage, away from the traditional kind of Middle East and Saudi-centric, Saudi or Iran kind of the traditional kind of proxies of Cold War and stuff. It seems like there is you hosted President Erdogan recently, in London. I didn't go myself, but I was very busy that night. But, I heard that you kind of gave an address there and so forth. How important or how effective do you think these kind of channels of either diplomacy or Muslim countries kind of working together to try and show some kind of leadership? Is this something that we can see in our lifetimes, do you think? Or is your psychology that you're planting seeds maybe for 100 years or so to sprout?
My psychology is that as a Muslim, I have to do my utmost for today, and a change may come in a click tomorrow, or it may take another 50, 60, 70, 100 years. Either way, I need to do my bit. In the authentic hadith, if the day of judgment is upon you and you're carrying a bulb or a seed, or plant it. Although you're never going to see the results, but plant it, be constructive. But also I embark from a position of believing that the world is broken. The world that we have today, call it the world order, call it the international community. The world is broken. We lack a very, very important ingredient in world politics today, and that is morality.
Okay.
And the
I
lack
thought you were
of
going to say Khilafah.
No. We don't need khilafah.
Okay.
We don't need khilafah. Khilafah is just
Really,
a
that's
tool.
quite
It's a form of government, and
it's quite a controversial statement for some people.
For some, I believe it's going to be a matter of iman and kufr. But I take my position backed with evidence from, ulama across history, not just now. But the world today.
We need what you're saying is we need the objectives that were once fulfilled by Khilafah to be fulfilled, i.e.
we need, if you wish, I mean, to use a contemporary term, a value system, and a value system that could be implemented through any means whatsoever. We'll call it democracy, call it shura, call it khilafah, call it statesman, whatever it is. As long as the value system is there, and by the way, most people would agree, I would say 90% of human race would agree on what the good values, good and bad, what they would be. And also the ingredient of morality. Talking about human rights means absolutely nothing if ultimately I take away the aspect of morality and efficacy in my dealings, and therefore present my interests above values and above this question of morality. So I think that when we talk about war, when we talk about occupation, when we talk about famine and disease, when we talk about poverty and deprivation, we're essentially talking about the lack of morality. When we talk about, one thing that President Erdogan has recently been really banging about in virtually every one of his public speeches, and that is that how could 5 nations, i.e. the UN Security Council, 5 nations, be in charge of world affairs, be in charge of matters so critical and so crucial as war and peace and treaties and punishments and the such. How could that even be? I believe that's one aspect of the void of morality. The economic system that we're governed by. I mean, it's atrocious. It is atrocious. And the manifestation of this atrocity is the fact that I read just before the elections that 8 people in the UK, they own more than 15 million or 18 million put together. How could that be? This whole argument, one day my son came to me and said, what do you think about this argument about no one should be a billionaire? I said, well, listen, someone could be a billionaire, but then the moral code that they should be abiding by should force them or compel them to contribute.
Not be a millionaire anymore.
A billionaire anymore. I mean, they should contribute towards society and towards projects and education and the such. Those billions that they have been given. Yeah. So it's, once again, I think that if we're thinking exactly about what it is that we want to achieve, I believe that we can't continue. And again, another controversial point of view probably. We can't continue to say, well, you know what? We should only care about the issues of Muslims because they are the most victimized, they are the most targeted, they are the most oppressed, they are the most deprived, they are the most... I believe we fall far short of, firstly, our Islamic obligation. And secondly, I believe that we put ourselves up to fail. Because, let me give you an analogy. Let's assume I'm living on the banks of a flowing river. If there is a chemical plant at the top of the river, then the water arriving as blue or clear as it looks, it's going to be polluted. And I can't drink, I can't use it, I can't probably even bathe in it because it's full of chemicals. Now, I can never in that situation say, you know what, I don't care about the others who live downriver, upriver, I don't care across the river, I don't care about them. I want to care about myself and my children and that they consume clean water. How can that be achieved unless something is done about the chemical plant and it stops throwing chemicals into the river? Meaning, everyone needs to have clean water for me to have clean water. In the same way, everyone needs to have good health service so that I can enjoy good health service. Everyone needs to drive on good roads and good transport systems so that I can enjoy the same facilities. I can't exclude myself from my surroundings and say, well, I don't care about others. I just want it for myself.
You're thinking win-win, basically.
It's not. You know what? It's an obligation that we create a system that is just for everyone, and an education system that is thriving for everyone, an economic system that ensures that everyone is part of that development and enrichment and the such.
But I mean, the current, I suppose, the most dominating and most aggressively spread ideology, I think, in the world today, is neoliberalism, economic neoliberalism, and there's arguments to say that looks at the fundamental relationship between human beings as very different to what you just described, as at our essence we are kind of pleasure maximizing and pain minimizing creatures, just and our our most basic fundamental relationships are mediated by competition, that we're competing for scarce resources. It's so in the presence of such a dominant and aggressively spread and widespread ideology or discourse, you need to we need to have some kind of way to attack that at the same time as, or trying to dismantle some of its effects, right?
I think that rather than what we need to do essentially is establish our own narrative. I don't mind thinking that every ideology out there has some aspects which I can utilize that are good, and they are something that would contribute towards the kind
Wisdom
of aspiration.
Is a lost property of a Muslim.
Absolutely. Al-hikmatu dhalatul mu'min. So I have no problem with that. But what I have a true problem with is the fact that we as Muslims haven't developed an Islamic, if you wish, ideology or narrative that sets itself up to be adopted by non-Muslims that think, well, this actually works. And by the way, I don't even mind calling it something else than being an Islamic. I'm not, these are just labels. The essence, as I said, it's value-based. It has the ingredients of morality. It sees justice as its pursuit. And taking away, you talk about neoliberalism. Unfortunately, one way or another, we could talk about certain aspects and certain terms and the such, but ultimately speaking, people are seen as consumers. People talk about Iraq, for instance, and the war on Iraq as being a war for oil. I don't think it was a war for oil. Oil might have been one of the pursuits. But Saddam Hussein and the Ba'ath regime were giving the West what they needed of oil anyway. They didn't need to go and do what they did or pay the cost that they did or sacrifice the lives of British and American and Australian sons and daughters for the oil. What was important was that Iraq was a marketplace where 30 million new consumers could enter. Essentially, we're trying, the concept of globalization, the concept of world domination is essentially, as one, redneck, illiterate, probably ill-educated American soldier once said, he won't rest until a McDonald's is set up in mid-Baghdad. At the time, we laughed. But what he said was, essentially, it was it. That is the idea. That is the idea. The world is supposed to be a market that is open for and therefore we talk about competition. But the problem is that this competition that you are told that you are an equal in, you are far from being an equal in. You're entering with both your hands tied behind your back, because this marketplace demands an ideological, a moral and ethical setup, as well as a political setup and the such. For instance, how could, in the midst of the West, which is largely democratic, largely free, largely liberal, how is it that anyone who demands that, this freedom that I enjoy and I'm thriving in, I would like my Palestinian brothers and sisters to enjoy the same? How, where would then I stand in terms of this open marketplace where I'm told I'm an equal? I wouldn't be treated as an equal. In fact, more than that, 2 years ago, I was invited to, I'm not going to say which, but I was invited to one of the mainstream media outlets to comment on something.
Yeah.
And they said, as soon as I arrived, they said, you have to wear a poppy. It was November. And I said, I'm sorry, I'm not going to wear a poppy. They said, well, we have laws and policies that you have to wear a poppy. UK? In the UK.
Wow.
And I turned away and said, well, I'm sorry, if that's your policy, then I'm going to go back.
But why do you hate Britain so much?
Well, that's the thing. I love Britain to the extent that I don't wish war upon it, and I don't wish it to go to war upon others. So you see, it's partly... I'm not here about dismantling socialism or dismantling liberalism or dismantling this. I'm about developing a narrative with the values that we believe in, with the contents of our faith. People say, well, how are you going to do that? How could you hope to attract non-Muslims to something which you're basing upon your faith? I'm saying, well, listen, when I believe as a Muslim, La ilaha illallah, this means to me that I am a slave to no promotion, marketing campaign of any product. I'm not a slave to, the marketplace. I'm not a consumer. I am someone who's a contributor. That is what it tells me. This is what I understand from La ilaha illallah. That I'm not going to be held ransom by the monthly paycheck and for it to stay silent when I see an injustice happening in front of me. I do not fear anyone because I understand that Allah is my provider, my supplier. When I say La ilaha illallah, that's the kind of implication that follows. I would think that most people today, Muslims and none, would like that kind of situation, not to be tied or held ransom to the rat race, to the marketplace, to the pension that is likely to be collapse or to turn out to be some sort of Ponzi scheme or the such. I think that those who suffer as a result of the unethical economic system go far beyond the Muslim community.
Yeah. I mean, we had a video from Dr. Dawood Bakr, global expert in Islamic finance from the KL Summit, and he was saying, we're trying to develop products and develop a system where it will be the mainstream in the world because people will choose that rather than something which is based on
and for that reason and whilst, for instance, the KL Summit is an excellent initiative, the biggest story of the summit was Saudi Arabia didn't turn up.
I wasn't invited.
Wasn't invited, or it was invited, but then it sort of pushed or forced the Pakistani Prime Minister to withdraw. Otherwise, it would expel the hundreds of thousands of Pakistani laborers who work in Saudi. So, ultimately speaking, we have to start somewhere in order to create the kind of just existence, not only for Muslims, you see. And that's
but in order to do so, Muslims do need to get their house in order, obviously, to coordinate, to synergize, to work together. Do you think that, I mean, one criticism that always comes to, any Muslim leader, whether it be Erdogan or Imran Khan or Mahathir Mohamad, is that they're more interested in their own, national interests than kind of the Ummah. Or they'll put the ummahs. They won't care about the Uyghurs, for example, but they'll care primarily about their own kind of borders.
I'll give you a far more clear example. I mean, one of the figureheads at the KL Summit was President Rouhani of Iran.
Yeah.
Iran is arguably one of the greatest forces that are working against the unity of the Ummah today, supporting the Bashar al-Assad regime, doing its havoc in Yemen, in Lebanon, in Iraq, and the such. So in a way, you could argue that from the word go, there is a problem with the issue. I agree with you that because of the status quo, every one of those leaders, whilst making excellent statements and protestations and proclamations, is absolutely has, one eye on domestic affairs and sorting out their own economy, their own internal challenges, their own internal politics and conflicts and the such. So yes, and that's because they're working within the system. This kind of paradigm, whether it be economic or political or social or ideological, needs to be dismantled, and it needs to be put together again by everyone who has a claim, who has a stock in this particular investment, which is life, which is the world, but according to values, according to ethics and morals.
Assalamu alaikum guys, last reminder I promise. Head over to islam21c.com/donate to help this movement get to the next level. So we have genuine, high quality media articulating Islam in the 21st century and developing confident Muslims impacting the world for the better.
Yes, of course.
Do you think the people in charge right now of these countries, do you think they want to do that? Do you think the future's bright in that regard?
Yes.
Because I don't think personally, I don't feel that it's fair to criticize, a prime minister who's the head of or a president who's the head of a particular state who has a contract with that people to govern them according to X, Y, Z. I think it's unfair to criticize them for, not caring about the ummah because they don't, for example, go and invade the neighboring country and save the Muslims there.
I absolutely 100% agree with you. In fact, a couple of years ago, probably in 2018, less than a couple of years ago, we were visited by Anwar Ibrahim, who is the Deputy Prime Minister of Malaysia. And he had just won this new coalition with Mahathir Mohamad in Malaysia. And he came to London to give a few lectures and conduct a few meetings. And we had a meeting with him with a few other Muslim leaders. And we were invited to ask him questions or to make comments and statements. And I noticed, to be honest, I didn't have anything to say, and I thought that those present would speak, on everyone's behalf. But then I noticed that people were mentioning to him Palestine. We're talking to him about Syria. We're talking to him. So after about 4 or 5 comments, I raised my hand and I said, I have something to say. And I said to him, listen, all this is beautiful. And I'm pretty sure that everyone really is very keen for you to play a role. I would say, check out Malaysia. I would say you need to make sure that Malaysia is strong, is prosperous, is developed. Malaysia is just. Malaysia is rid of corruption. That's your priority, because we can't have another problematic state. We can't have. We don't want wars. We don't want you sending an army to I don't know where in order to defend whoever. I would rather Malaysia is a strong economy, is a strong political entity, is a strong democracy, is a free country, is a just country, provides a fantastic example for other countries to emulate and to follow. I'd rather that than, wallahi, you traveling across, fighting with people over Palestine or fighting with people over Syria. The Palestinians will benefit far more than from a strong Malaysia and a just and transparent and democratic Malaysia.
You have some kind of, clout on the global stage eventually to make. But this requires a level of political literacy and maturity on our part as well. I mean, we need. I think we need a mixture. We need people who we need the hyperbole at times.
Yes.
We need people to make impassioned kind of speeches about the ummah.
Of course.
And that's very, very important for us to hold that in our hearts.
Of course.
And likewise, you see, statements from sportsmen, for example.
Yes.
Saying making important kind of statements publicly, but a politician or the people who are trying to they have a strategy to strengthen their countries, to work with like-minded countries, to try and increase their strength in cooperation and become free of the shackles of American US neoliberalism, neo-imperialism or that kind of domination. I think we need to, as an ummah, recognize that people are, like the ayah you mentioned, it's about istita'a. If you're able to liberate Palestine, then Allah will ask you about that.
Yes.
Why you didn't do that.
Correct.
But if you're unable to do it, i.e. trying to do it will lead to a bigger mafsada,
Yes.
will lead to a bigger headache, will lead to some kind of, a bigger crisis than that, then you're judged based on that. So somebody saying, talking about Imran Khan, for example, I don't like that. This is the worst thing about this, because it puts me in the position of defending politicians. I hate doing.
Yes.
I don't like to defend Imran Khan.
No.
If it's simply unfair to say, why aren't you helping the Uyghurs, for example?
Yeah.
As close they are to my heart. What's he supposed to do?
I agree.
You can't
absolutely.
just take an army and invade them, or even risk, serious civil war within his own country by cutting off. It's very sad to say, but cutting off, an important lifeline to his
absolutely
to that economy.
Listen. I to be honest, I think that the greatest challenge that we face today, if you were to tell me what is the greatest challenge that the Muslim Ummah faces today, I would say oppression. Oppression. And oppression creates dictatorial states. It creates failed regimes. It creates regimes that, because they are corrupt and they are failed, they have no loyalty with the public, and therefore they have to get their justification and their legitimacy from outside. So they go either to America or to Russia or to Britain or to... So all of a sudden we have this kind of state. So
and it leads to a reactionary oppression as well.
Absolutely, and therefore, when I say that being politically engaged and removing all forms of oppression, all forms of injustice, must be our objective. It's because of this, because we won't be able to create strong economies without governments as well as nations working together in order to create that kind of economy. We won't be able to talk about states without corruption.
Yeah.
If no one felt that they were safe, or no one felt that they had a stake in the future of their country. And listen, what you said was absolutely spot on in terms of, we have to accept that our discussions are diverse.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that if there is one form of cohesion, wherever I travel in the Muslim world, whether it be, I was in Bosnia last week, and I'm often in Turkey. I was in Jordan before that. All sorts of countries. I visit Malaysia all the time. There is one commonality, and that is that every single taxi driver that takes you from the airport to your hotel will tell you, I don't know whether you've been said that, will tell you the problem of Muslims is they are not united.
SubhanAllah.
And Muslim unity is what?
So now, they're united in that.
And now, if I was having a discussion in a lecture hall, I would say, well, unity of what? Unity of objective, or unity of means and method? What kind of unity are we talking about? But that pleases me. The fact that even taxi drivers, wherever they may be, and they have never been outside their cities or countries, they agree on the fact that Muslims need to unite. Now, we need to take that, and we need to take stock from that, and we need to multiply and proliferate that, so that basically we come to an understanding that we need to understand Islam. We need to understand our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as human beings. And we need to take from that an understanding and appreciation of what that means and how that implies my relationship with my surroundings, including the people, all the people who are within that surrounding. Once we understand that, we will be able to develop the kind of values and the kind of morals and ethics that make for a system that is in everyone's best interest.
Well, I mean, at Islam 21C, our kind of vision and our core focus is to see every Muslim confident in their Islam and impacting the world positively. So I'm always keen to try and get some practical advice for our listeners. What's your message, for example, to the Muslim community in terms of a practical way forward? So the people listening at home while they're commuting or whatever, what's your message to them in terms of practically what can we do?
We're at the heels of 2019, and in a few days' time we'll be in 2020. Everyone needs to make up their minds. What kind of contribution do they want to make? Whenever we meet, our brothers, whenever we meet, we ask them, how are you? How's the family? How are you doing?
Small talk.
How's it? Small talk. How many times in the past, time that you recall, how many times have we considered asking the question, so what's your project in life? Okay, Salman, so what's your project in life? What are you aiming towards? Let's try to elevate the kind of discussions
that was a rhetorical question.
let's try to elevate the kind of discussions that we have, and maybe that will have some kind of impact on our practice, so that basically every single day that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants me, and I wake up and I'm healthy and I can think clearly, I'm thinking to myself, so what am I doing today in order to feed to my overall objective? And I'm not just talking about pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's inshallah everyone's pursuit. I'm talking about
practically, what do you want to... I tell young people when they're looking for, when they're trying to argue against their parents of sending them into medicine, I say, what do you want to meet Allah having achieved?
Exactly. What's your imprint in life? What's the kind of impact that you're going to have on the world? And it doesn't have to be, and this is something that we need to learn. It doesn't have to be Islamic. I don't want you to tell me, praying at least 3 times in the masjid every single day, or making this or that. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about when you die, how will you be remembered? When you pass, and every single one of us will pass, how will you be remembered? What is it that you will have created that will have a long-lasting impact on everyone? Not just on Muslims, not just on your family, but on everyone. Once we start to think that way, we'll start to talk in elevated terms, and we'll start to behave and act in elevated terms. And once we do that, we'll know that every single human being out there, regardless of their faith, regardless of their culture or their creed, Allah has willed for them to be there for a hikmah, for wisdom. We need to reach out to everyone around us and impact them positively.
What's next for Cordoba Foundation then?
Well, we have several things going on.
15-year birthday.
We have, besides blowing the candles out, which is going to be one heck of an effort, but we have a big project pertaining to Islamophobia in Europe, amid rising far-right governments across Europe. And hopefully, inshallah, we'll have some sort of impact, or some sort of commentary, let's say, or analysis for the 2020 American elections, because that's going to be very, very important. And inshallah, I'm hoping, that in 2020 we'll see a movement in the Muslim world in 1 or 2 places towards free, just societies ruled by some form of democracy or shura or openness or transparency. And that will be an exciting advent for all of us, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair. I think it's a good sign normally when I don't realize how long it's been, but I had a lot of fun having a chat with you. Jazakallah khair for coming.
It's been a pleasure.
Jazakallah khair at home. If you like this podcast, give a like and a share. Even if you didn't, give a like and share anyway, and help us make better ones. Put some suggestions in the comments as well. Anything you found noteworthy, beneficial, and also remember to make dua for us and share it with your friends as well. If you made it to the end of this podcast, you're awesome, mashallah. You didn't just get distracted by something shiny. But also a reminder to subscribe to our podcast channels, wherever you get your podcasts, Google, Apple, all the usual places. And that's it for me. Jazakumullah khairan. See you soon in the next episode. And assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. Unscripted.